Hello and welcome to this video edition of Technomicon Media. This is Matthew, and today we're going to be looking at Final Fantasy XIV, focusing on gameplay and some of the nicer features. Here you can see a Lalafell female running through Thanalan. One of the nicer elements of Final Fantasy XIV is just the high level of rendering and detail to the terrain as well as the character models. Certainly a huge step up from Final Fantasy XI in terms of detail, rendering, graphics, all the things you would expect from a contemporary game. And just like in Final Fantasy XI, there's certainly going to be a lot of running around as you explore the new world of Azoria. One of the things I've always loved about the Final Fantasy series, and 14 specifically, is the way jobs are changed and the multiple job system. In Final Fantasy XIV, one can change their job simply by changing their main hand weapon, or in this case, tool. This makes it very convenient when attacking enemies and spotting that nice resource node and being able to change jobs as soon as you're out of combat. Currently, there's no restrictions on the amount of jobs you can have. The only restriction is how many weapons you can acquire and carry. Here you can see some actual resource gathering. Final Fantasy XIV is different from 11 and other MMOs in the sense that you need to play a mini-game in order to acquire the resources. Once a resource is located, a mining node for example, the player must engage in a small game of hot and cold in order to actually acquire the mineral. The hot or cold game works by each mining strike letting the player know how close or far away the actual resource is and allowing the player to narrow in on the target. As you can see, it can take quite a number of strikes in order to acquire a mineral. Crafting is back once again in Final Fantasy XIV in the form of synthesis. Just like in 11, players will combine crystals, or shards in this case, and other types of materials in order to synthesize or produce items and materials. The main difference in Final Fantasy XIV in terms of crafting is that another minigame must be played where the player must progress from 0% to 100%, thus producing an actual item. The synthesis minigame allows the player to choose between standard, rapid, or bold types of synthesis, as well as a wait feature when synthesis conditions become unfavorable. Players also, through the leveling of their crafting professions, gain new synthesis options in order to better produce, change favorable conditions, or even skip the synthesis minigame altogether. HQing is also a part of Final Fantasy XIV crafting, and the ability touch-up as seen here is a way for players to turn normal produced items into their HQ versions. This of course is in addition to the opportunity for HQs through a 0 to 100 progression. And here you can see some of Final Fantasy XIV's combat system, which is a huge improvement over 11. Players now use visual icons in place of spells and abilities as opposed to the old-style 11 menus. And of course, through a multi-job system, players can combine offensive and defensive capabilities from all the jobs that they've learned. In this example, I have a thaumaturge combining additional healing abilities of a pugilist as well as the offensive direct damage spells of a conjurer. For those familiar with how difficult monsters were in Final Fantasy XI, you're in for a pleasant surprise. Party experience and party grouping is still the focus of Final Fantasy, as it's one of its core values, but here you can see a decent challenge, or an orange mob, being taken out solo. To put that in perspective, the Final Fantasy XIV difficulty ratings are done in color groups, where blue is incredibly easy, green is pretty easy, yellow is a decent challenge, orange is a very difficult challenge, and red is considered certain death. I wouldn't recommend taking on orange level mobs from an experience gain standpoint. They just take too long to kill. I just wanted to give an example of how combat looked, felt, how spells were cast, and how feasible solo play could be. And this concludes this video feature of Final Fantasy XIV. For the full review, check us out at technomicon.com. And thanks for watching.